Once you figured out what dessert you would like to try to paint on your canvas, you're going to use your reference photo. You want to be looking at it the entire time you are painting so that you can get the most accurate representation of it as possible. With your reference photo, you're going to take a pencil and draw a basic outline, lightly in pencil, of your composition. You want to make sure that your drawing fills the entire canvas. That means we should have some of the dessert running off. There should be a background if you need a background, but we should not have one tiny dessert item floating in the center of your canvas. Once you are ready to start your painting, what we're going to do is create a base layer paint for our canvas. This means that we're going to put color down everywhere that is white on the canvas. This is going to be a general color of what you are hoping it looks like in the final, but it does not have to match perfectly at this point. You're just blocking in. This is not a fancy painting. It is going to look very basic. There will be no shading, but you're going to work on mixing colors in your palette using your paints and just filling in every area that needs to be painted for us to be able to layer on top of later. So after we have created our base coat, so everything on our canvas has been painted, it's just not painted well, we're going to start adding layers of paint to create a more dynamic picture where you can actually tell what is happening instead of having blobs on your page like my cupcakes look like right now. My background, I want a nice ombre technique. I'm using a couple shades of blue. I worked a little harder to make the shades I exactly want, and I'm working on adding dark tones and light tones directly into that background. So you can see it's a nice soft transition from dark blue to light blue above the cupcake. So my cutting board has this really cool wooden knot in it, so I want to try and emulate that wood grain texture. My first step is to work on getting a better matching color. So I went and mixed a new brown that's a little bit better for that dark tone of the cutting board. Then I'm going to go ahead and make lighter shades of it. So I'm adding some white into that brown to block in where my highlights of that knot are. And then after that, I'll go in with adding a little bit of darker shades by adding a touch more blue into my brown and work on adding the shadows of the wood grain so that that cutting board pops a little bit more and looks way more refined than it did before. A texture that you might find as being common in your dessert is a sponge-like cake texture. So what we're going to do for that is you want to make sure you have 3 different values of your cake color. So your original color, a darker version, and a lighter version. And then you take your paintbrush. I'm using a small round paintbrush and I'm just dabbing it, holding it nice and vertical like a Q-tip so that it can make a small dot in its spot, and those 3 tones, as I'm varying putting them down, are blending together and creating this surface texture that makes it look like it has a sponge without painstakingly doing every dot. Alright, let's talk about how I approach the cupcake liners. If I'm being honest, it was probably the most tedious portion of this painting as there's so many little areas of tints and shades to add to get a convincing 3-dimensional cupcake liner look. I have about 45 minutes of painting footage boiled down and sped up to fit into a 1-minute clip for you. As you can see, I have my iPad still next to me. So for this portion, I really relied on the image of the cupcake and how it's interacting with the liner. If you think about this cupcake liner, it's one of those thinner wax paper, see-through-y type cupcake liners, and I need to make sure that I can see some of my base tone through it. So basically what I did was I made a very, very light tint of my cupcake color, and I started to add white lines where the top of my cupcake liner, that pointy part, was sticking out of my cupcake. And then in my cavities or shadows, so the area that's darker that really makes it three-dimensional and look like the cupcake liner has points to it, I started to add in shadows by using a touch of my warm blue into my cupcake color, because those are complementary colors to make my darker neutral. And it just took a lot of time, me going back and forth to the picture, but eventually with layers it worked out. If you are thinking about desserts, the final touch of most desserts is that it has some sort of frosting, whipped cream, something that is a nice smooth substance. So let's talk about how to make that texture. Even though it is a white frosting on this cupcake, we have to consider the fact that there are a lot of hidden colors within the white. Nothing is purely white. We have a built-up dome of piping where we have little tubes stacked on top of each other to make this beehive type look so that we can get the frosting. So if you think about each of those individual tubes, they are actually sitting on top of each other and creating a shadow. So my frosting, I used white as a base and made very, very, very light blue-gray colors to go ahead and add some definition. So in creating my color of the frosting, I used a very, very soft tints of a blue-gray with a little bit of yellow in it to give it a greenish vibe. In doing so, I added that shade to the areas where the frosting was kind of sitting on top of each other to make a three-dimensional texture, and added white on top. Let's talk about the final detail of this painting. I took the camera and zoomed in a little bit more so you can see what I'm doing on the fruit, because they're slightly smaller than the things before. But basically, I'm going to go in and add detail to all of my fruit that is sitting on top. As you can see, I still have my iPad out. I have it really zoomed in, and I'm looking to see where on that grape that purple red tone is lighter and where it is a little bit darker with a little bit more purpley hues into it. As I'm going through step by step, I'm just gonna keep looking slowly and carefully at all the changing values. My other challenge with painting the fruit is that I want to make sure I get my colors as accurate as possible at this stage. I've been working on it the whole painting, but these fruits are iconic, and you know the color of a blueberry, so you can't just use whatever blue you feel like. You know a strawberry is a nice warm red, so you don't want to make a nice cool strawberry. It's just not going to look right. So I recommend you guys have a scrap piece of paper next to you that you can go ahead and practice your colors on if you're not sure you're getting them correct. But I'm going through and working really hard to make those different tones and adding different values and shades of the color as I'm going through. I'm working in layers. You can see me working on the kiwi with some whites, then going back with the green, going back with the darker green where I added a little blue in it to make the shadow. It's a constant process. I have to wait for the paint to dry in between layers sometimes, but it is worth it in the end. Another thing you have to think about is that fruit is a wet substance. It is not the same as a piece of paper. You want to make sure it has this little look of sheen and shininess. So one of the last steps on every single piece of fruit that I did was add a small highlight. So this is just a pure white line wherever I think it is necessary. So you can see on the strawberry, I'm adding a whole bunch of little dots where the pits are and the light's hitting it. As you finish your paintings, remember every dessert is different, so use your reference picture.